Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. And these are our top stories. Xi Jinping showcases China's military might in a grand parade that's been attended by Putin and Kim Jong-un, as Trump accuses the three leaders of conspiring against the United States. And on the sidelines of today's events in Beijing, Putin invites Kim Jong-un to Russia after they hold a 2.5-hour meeting together. Plus, thousands of Israeli reservists join a major military offensive on Gaza City as protests erupt outside Benjamin Netanyahu's home over the fate of its hostages. First, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has hailed his country's unstoppable rise as he showcased its military might in a grand parade marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. In a speech, he has also said that the world faces a choice between peace and war. His comments seem to be presenting an alternative to Western-led global order, as Patrick Falk reports.
Dressed in a Mao suit, President Xi Jinping walked shoulder to shoulder with Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as they headed for the start of Victory Day celebrations. It's the triangular alliance Beijing wants to project to the world, signaling unity between the West's foes. More than 50,000 spectators were present in Tiananmen Square to mark 80 years since the end of the Japanese War of Aggression. In his opening address, Xi outlined China's readiness to play a bigger role in shaping global order.
Today, humanity once again faces a choice between peace and war, dialogue and confrontation, mutual benefit and zero-sum competition. The Chinese people firmly stand on the right side of history, on the side of human civilization and progress, committed to the path of peaceful development and working together with peoples of all countries to build a community with a shared future for humankind.
Tanks, missile launchers and all manners of military hardware rolled past audiences in the capital. Among the weapons displayed was the DF-61, a new land-based intercontinental missile. Various aerial drones and other hypersonic missiles were featured also. The last time China held a military parade was in 2019. What we saw this time has been described as a coming-out party for China's military modernization and a signal to the West of its growing capabilities. Reacting to events in Beijing, US President Donald Trump took to social media, posting a message saying, "Please give my warmest regards to Putin and Kim as you conspire against the United States of America." Also monitoring developments was Japan.
Japan has constantly pursued the path of a peaceful nation since the post-war period, striving to build a free and democratic country that respects human rights and the rule of law. We have consistently emphasized this position to China and communicated it to the international community on various occasions.
The parade culminates a week-long campaign to stoke pride and nationalism and to recast China's role in the Second World War against a foreign aggressor. For many of those participating, it was a rallying cry to unite in the face of economic uncertainty and tensions with the US. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Now, following the parade, President Trump has accused the three leaders of conspiring against the United States. And in the last hour, he said he thought America should have been mentioned during China's speech. For more on this story, we're joined by Robert Kelly, the Professor of Political Science at Busan National University in South Korea. Robert, first of all, thanks for joining us. As we said, Trump has said Xi, Putin and Kim have all been conspiring against the US. Do you think that they're being deliberately provocative here to against the US and also to the West? What's your opinion on this?
Well, I think there's a general fear or concern out there in Western strategic circles that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are growing together into some kind of axis. That's a sort of very common language you're hearing now, an axis of upheaval or resistance or something. I'm not sure how much of an axis it is, right? It's probably more like a gang, but there is this sort of debate out there. As for Donald Trump himself conspiring, I mean, that's very much Donald Trump's way of speaking on social media. He tends to sort of shoot his mouth off. And, it's not really clear to me that Donald Trump is thinking about these strategic issues very much. So my own sense is that's just kind of a typical Trumpian outburst. But it does kind of shadow the larger debate in the West about how much China, Russia, and North Korea are actually coordinating, specifically, for example, in Ukraine.
As we just saw as well, the post on Truth Social where he says, give my regards, it does seem a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And the Kremlin has brushed it off, saying that Trump was being ironic. Is this really the case, though? You've said that you think it's a very Trumpite thing to do. Do you think he's feeling threatened, perhaps, at this?
Well, I certainly think that in the West, right, there is this sense that the liberal international order is under pressure. Not just, by the way, from these external forces too, but also from Donald Trump himself, who doesn't seem to actually care too much for America's liberal allies, like Canada and NATO and so on. But there's this sense that authoritarian or illiberal forces in the world are rising, and that they are increasingly looking to rewrite the rules, particularly of the world economy, things like trade, the IMF, the use of the dollar, right? And that is being led mostly by China. China is the wealthiest authoritarian state easily out there, right? And other powers are sort of clustering around it, right? Russia, most obviously. Russia needs China's support in the Ukraine conflict, but also sort of smaller authoritarian powers, like Iran and North Korea, right? And all of them are kind of hoping to ride this train, if you will, with China in the lead, to sort of change the system to make it more multipolar. That's the language that Vladimir Putin likes to use, right? Sort of overturn the leadership role the United States has had. Again, it's not clear to me, though. I mean, you came back to Trump. It's not clear to me that President Trump really understands this stuff very much, to be honest, right? I mean, Donald Trump tends to see international relations in a very personalized way. He's friends with Kim Jong-un, and therefore we should be able to fix things. I don't think that many scholars and analysts think international relations operates like that, but Trump's view is very personalistic, right? So if he gets along with Vladimir Putin, I guess things are okay.
Let's take it away from the US for a second. This is, as we said, the first time we've seen Putin, Xi and Kim all together on this global stage. So even aside from the US, which you've mentioned already, Robert, what message is it sending to the other US allies, specifically Europe?
Yeah, so the fact that you have the three of them together is actually pretty unique. So I work mostly on Korean issues out here in Asia, and it's very, very rare for the North Korean leader to actually leave the country, right? It's very, it's risky for dictators to leave the country because they might be overthrown in a coup and they're gone. This has been a particular threat for the North Koreans for a long time. I believe this is only the fourth or fifth trip that Kim Jong-un has made outside of the country. And the fact that he's coming together with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at the same time, I believe this is unique. Nothing like this has really happened ever, actually, since the end of the Cold War. And so I think that's why this is getting so much media attention, or even in the West, and even like CNN and so on are carrying the big parade, because there's this perception that we're getting real alignment here, that maybe it was a gang or something a year or two ago, but it's actually increasingly coming to serious cooperation, right? And if that's true, then, as you said, Europe, I think, is probably the one that's most at threat, of course, because Europe has, a big border with Russia. Europe is on the Eurasian sort of landmass, if you will. The United States is further away, so the United States can afford Donald Trump and his sort of erratic behavior on Twitter and saying all these kinds of outrageous things. But if you're U.S. allies, for example, South Korea or Japan, right, Poland, Ukraine, if you're near these states, right, it's very worrisome if they're all cooperating. So, for example, if I were Ukraine, I would be very concerned about this, right, because the more Russia gets cooperation from North Korea and China, the more it helps the Russians win the war.
Robert, we saw this as China using it somewhat to unveil new weapons, drones, nuclear missiles, and other concerns as well. How do you think the US and also the allies in the West should respond to something like this? Because it effectively is military posturing.
Right. So I think it's pretty clear at this point, and the parade, I think, makes this very clear, that the Chinese now see themselves in a direct military competition, a direct arms race with the United States, right? I mean, this is really starting to look like the Cold War all over again. There are distinctions and differences, but I think the larger framing that you have kind of a bipolar struggle between two large powers and their clusters of allies around them, and they're kind of in this competition over the rules of world order. I think that's what we're sliding towards. And it certainly seems to be how Xi Jinping wanted to present this parade and the day with these other leaders around him, that China's leading a bloc of states that want revision rather than just China alone. right? And so rolling out the hardware is a good way to do that, right? It looks like the Chinese really want to be able to go point to point with the Americans in terms of hardware. They want to have a blue water fleet. They want to have a large army, or particularly if it comes to invasion of Taiwan. They want to sort of match the Americans missile for missile, warhead for warhead. Chinese are building a lot of nuclear weapons at the moment. And so it looks a lot like the Cold War, right? Where you have sort of like this matching kind of competition. And the United States is pretty well postured for that. The United States has a lot of money and we can always build more. But the United States hasn't had a direct competitor like this since, the Soviets back in the early 1980s. This is quite new. And, I don't know if Donald Trump is up to it.
Robert Kelly in South Korea, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to continue on this story. On the sideline of the day's events in Beijing, Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un met for a 2.5-hour meeting. The Russian president hailed the North Korea soldiers who are fighting alongside Russian forces in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Kim told Putin it was his country's fraternal duty to help as much as possible. Putin also invited the North Korean leader to Russia. Now, to continue this conversation, we're joined from Kiev by Ukrainian MP Yulia Sirko. Yulia, we've seen Kim Jong-un tell Putin it's North Korea's fraternal duty to help Russia out. How concerned is Kiev about more weapons or even more troops that could be flowing into Moscow as a result of this meeting?
Hello from Kiev. Thank you for hosting me. And we in Ukraine already see North Korean influence and North Korean involvement in the war between Ukraine and Russia for over a year. So the soldiers, North Korean soldiers fighting in the front line, we have even prisoners of war from North Korea, as well as we see every day and every night we see North Korean missiles coming from Russia. So basically, North Korea already involved in the war for a few years in Ukraine. Today, it was just coming out, I would say. So they showed it purposely. It was a slap to the Trump's face, I would say. So they just show the unity of three authoritarian regimes, so to say, tyrannic club, or club of tyrants. They showed it openly for the whole world, and also showed the power, military power with weapons, with soldiers, etc. So I would say this is just the official part, because unofficially it started for a few years ago already with all these countries, with China, with Iran, with North Korea, who are supporting Putin in his war against Ukraine.
Just to pick up on the point that you mentioned there, North Korea's support is now on top of what your counterparts in Ukraine say is Iranian drone supply and Chinese backing as well. How much more difficult does this influx of support make the Ukrainian fight?
It is difficult, because if we are fighting only with Russia and Russia military power alone, I would say we already probably will win this war. We'll win with this war. But now, unfortunately, we have to fight against four countries: against Iranian drones, North Korean soldiers and missiles, and Chinese intelligence and spare parts. They are sending it in millions to Russia to construct and to build millions of drones and weapons. So that's making our life and fight much more difficult. And that's why we're asking our Western allies for the support of weapons and soldiers, and the support by unity, by financing, because we are basically already for a few years we are fighting against four heavily militarized and aggressive and authoritarian countries.
Yulia, let's talk about what's happening on the ground. Russian forces, as we know, are pushing even harder in Ukraine, specifically in Donbass and that region. Is this showing that Moscow feels braver? And now that we see this alliance with Beijing and Pyongyang, is there a sense of bravery that's there with Putin and his forces?
I would say it's opposite. I think Putin is struggling on the battlefield. So for the more than 1 year, he occupied only 0.3% of the territory of Ukraine. So which is very, very low with his capacity and with such authoritarian friends. But I think Putin feeling not comfortable because he is lack of people, lack of military in the army. They already started even drafting women from the prisons, and also he is not very comfortable with the amount of weapon he has to fight further. So basically, with all his capacity, he occupied, as I said, only 0.3% of the Ukrainian territory, and recently, for past few weeks, already deoccupied few villages in Donbas region and Kharkiv region. So moving out, we are actually pushing back Russians from the Donbas and from Kharkiv. So that's why I think he came to these big brothers and asking for help, and they are showing their muscles for the whole world, and particularly to Trump.
In Europe, meanwhile, President Zelensky is meeting Emmanuel Macron. That's later tonight. What are Ukraine hoping to get from France ahead of Thursday's coalition of the Willing Summit, which is going to take place?
France is one of the biggest and very well-equipped, military-equipped country in Europe. They are producing basically the whole range of weapons, as well as they have one of the powerful armies in Europe. So I think we all in Ukraine hope and we thinking that if Europe will unite its army and also industrial base for military production, then it will be more powerful than Russia and Russian supporters. That's actually what we're expecting from Europe as a main supporter of Ukraine, because their countries next doors to us. We have borders with them, with the European Union, and I think we don't need war on European Union continent and European Union territories. So we have to stop it on our territory, and that's why we are asking and hoping for European help, and as well as we see discussions about the European soldiers coming to help Ukrainian army.
Well, on the back of that meeting tonight, we've had it confirmed in the last hour that both Macron and Zelensky and other heads of state who were gathered are going to speak to President Donald Trump. In your opinion, what do you think President Zelensky needs to say to Donald Trump right now in order to have some action?
Probably he should say that Donald Trump, unfortunately, was mistaken about the friendship, about the possibility to split Russia from China. I think Trump expectations about the possibility that with the cooperation with Russia and that he could push back China from Russia, I think it was a mistake. So unfortunately, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea already so deeply linked between each other, and they are really linked not only by values and evil access, but also by finance, by resources, by economy, by labor force, etc., etc. So they unfortunately already deeply interconnected between each other. So there is no hope that Putin will leave his big brother China and will do friendship with Trump. So Trump should be more realistic and understand that in order to deter China, you need to deter Russia. To get victory and Ukraine against Russia, and then you can deter China. Otherwise, there is no way how you can overcome and to be successful against these monsters.
Yulia Sirko in Kiev, thank you so much for joining us. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making the headlines today. At least 11 people have been killed in a US strike against so-called narco-terrorists. In a post on social media, President Trump has said that the military operation targeted members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang and says the strike was conducted on a vessel in international waters, supposedly transporting narcotics that were bound for the US. Meanwhile, in the UK, the government is planning to ban energy drinks for those who are under the age of 16. Now, no official date has been set for the ban if it is implemented, but it would stop anyone under that age from buying caffeinated drinks like Red Bull, Monster and Prime from shops, restaurants, cafes, vending machines and from online. Afghanistan has airdropped commandos into areas that have been devastated by the magnitude 6 earthquake that struck earlier this week and killed an estimated 1,400 people. It comes as the country has ramped up efforts to search for survivors and deliver food, shelter and medical supplies where needed. And finally, a jury in the US has cleared the rapper Cardi B of assault in a civil trial. That's after a security guard sued her for $24 million for an alleged fingernail attack. Imani Ellis has said that the US rapper cut her cheek with her 3-inch fingernails during a spat in 2018. The jury only took about an hour to clear the Grammy-winning rapper of the allegations. Thousands of Israeli reservists are now reporting for duty as the military pushes ahead with its offensive in Gaza City. Ground forces are moving into the outskirts while Israeli air and artillery strikes continue, with hospitals saying dozens of Palestinians have been killed since midnight. The United Nations has warned of beyond catastrophic consequences as nearly 1 million people remain trapped. For more on this story, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by our correspondent, Blake Sifton. Blake, first of all, thousands of Israeli reservists are now reporting for duty. That's what we're hearing. How quickly are these call-ups changing the size and also the strength of the Israeli military that are on the ground?
Good evening. We understand that some 40 to 50,000 of the 60,000 reservists who received call-up notices are now being mobilized. An additional 20,000 reservists who are currently serving are having the length of their service extended. Now, this high level of reservists are being mobilized because we understand that some 4 divisions of the Israeli military would be involved in the offensive to seize and occupy Gaza City. Now, of the reservists, we understand that many will go to the West Bank, they'll go to northern Israel, and they will replace active duty Israeli soldiers, and those soldiers would go to Gaza for this offensive. Now, yesterday, the reservists were meant to begin showing up for duty, and we understand that turnout was much lower than it's been during previous emergency call-ups. And it's believed that that's because many reservists have served hundreds of days throughout the 23 months of this war. We've heard reports of exhaustion, and apparently many reservists are going to their commanders, and they're seeking exemptions on personal and financial rationale. And as well, yesterday, a group of reservists who are refusing to serve, refusing to report to duty because they are opposed to this offensive to seize and occupy Gaza City, held a press conference here in Tel Aviv. They said that that offensive on Gaza City would see the hostages harmed, would see Israeli soldiers killed, and they said it's illegal. They said they will not be involved, and they said that some 367 reservists have signed on to their pledge not to report to duty.
Blake, we're hearing that the ground forces are already there pushing towards Gaza City. What do we know about the scale of the offensive? How close are they actually to taking control in Gaza?
So these Israeli military operations on the outskirts of Gaza City are intensifying. There's been widespread airstrikes, heavy shelling from both tanks and artillery, and they're targeting the neighborhoods in Gaza City of Zaytun, of Sabra, of Shajaya, and the nearby city of Jabalia. Now, the Israeli military say that they are destroying Hamas infrastructure, that they are destroying tunnels, but residents have reported widespread destruction of buildings, including civilian homes, and satellite imagery shows that large swaths of these targeted neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, in many cases have been completely flattened. Now, all of these operations are being viewed as shaping operations ahead of the main offensive to seize and occupy Gaza City, and that offensive is expected to begin in the coming weeks.
Blake, local hospitals saying more than 50 Palestinians have been killed since midnight. What picture is emerging of the humanitarian crisis and the toll on that inside Gaza City?
Well, thousands of Palestinians have fled these affected areas, these targeted areas on the outskirts of Gaza City, to neighborhoods in the west of Gaza City that until now is reasonably safe. We understand that the streets of those neighborhoods in Gaza City is now filled with the tents of the displaced. Municipal authorities in Gaza City have warned that these attacks in these neighborhoods on the outskirts is damaging the sewage system, and that the sewage system of the entirety of Gaza City is now at risk of collapse. Of course, if that were to happen, the spread of disease would be a very real possibility. As you said, the United Nations is warning that if this offensive goes ahead, it will have catastrophic consequences for the civilian population of Gaza City. And of course, the UN have also said that Gaza City is the epicenter of the famine that's already gripping much of Gaza.
Blake, at the same time, there's these protests that are intensifying there in Israel. We've seen cars set ablaze near Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence. What are demonstrators demanding in terms of a hostage deal at this time?
Quite simply, they want the hostages released and they want the war to end. As a first step, they want the Israeli government to accept the ceasefire and hostage release proposal that's currently on the table and that Hamas has already agreed to. And that deal would see the release of roughly half of the Israeli hostages still in captivity in Gaza released during a interim 60-day ceasefire. Now, today, groups of the hostage activists escalated their actions with what they call a day of disruption. As you say, this morning, we saw trash cans as well as cars set on fire near Prime Minister Netanyahu's home. Members of Netanyahu's government have accused these activists of terrorism, and we understand the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence agency, is investigating them. Also, activists blocked themselves on the rooftop of the National Library in Jerusalem near the Knesset. They blocked highways. They protested outside of ministers' homes. And tonight, they are holding what's expected to be a very large protest outside of the home of Benjamin Netanyahu in West Jerusalem.
Blake, while we have you, we are getting some breaking news. Israeli military says that it has identified a missile launch from Yemen, which is heading towards Israel. Do we know any more about that breaking news at this stage?
Yes, so that ballistic missile fired from Yemen sounded sirens in the Jerusalem area and parts of the West Bank. The Israeli military say that they intercepted it, that they shot it down. Now, that launch comes after an earlier launch earlier this morning that targeted central Israel, where I am. There were sirens here in Tel Aviv. The Israeli military say that they also successfully intercepted that missile. Now, these two attacks, presumably by the Houthis, come in response to the airstrikes last week by the Israeli military that targeted and killed the Houthis' prime minister, as well as various other officials in their government. That strike, that attack by the Israeli military came in response to a ballistic missile, a new type of ballistic missile that was fired at Israel some 2 weeks ago. That was a cluster munition. And these ballistic missiles, they arrive in the traditional way, but then when they're in the air over Israel, they break up into smaller bomblets and they become much harder to shoot down. And some of those smaller bombs did make contact. One landed in a garden of someone's home in Israel. And while we did see the use of some of those cluster ballistic missiles during the war with Iran, this is the first time that the Houthi militia has used one.
Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining us. We're moving over now to the Venice Film Festival, where a new movie about the killing of a 5-year-old Palestinian girl in Gaza will make its debut today. The voice of Hind Rajab has been apparently backed by Brad Pitt and also Joaquin Phoenix, and it's set inside the dispatch centre of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society Rescue Services. The director and the girl's mum hope that the movie will draw attention to Gaza's suffering and will help end the war. For more on this story, we are joined from Venice by journalist Alina Trapattoni. Alina, thanks for chatting to us. First of all, the movie and Stop the Genocide has been clearly hitting hard in Venice. How have the audience and the protesters responded to the screening and also the wider Gaza conflict being spotlighted at a film festival?
Yes, well, for sure, the screening and the presence of Stop the Genocide, the film, has deeply resonated amongst Venice, amongst the impassioned audiences that are following it. And obviously, it's triggered quite a strong reviewer response. And this comes close in the heels of major protests that took place in the Lido of Venice, where the festival is held earlier this week, calling for an end to all conflict in Gaza. Many thousands of people, in fact, took to the streets, brandishing, peace flags and Palestinian flags and holding banners asking for an end to the conflict. And the protesters actually managed to get very close to the red carpet. They were stopped by the local police forces, a couple of 100 meters away from the red carpet. But all in all, very, very felt, very, very followed. They were joined by artists and filmmakers as well. And of course, both Brad Pitt and Joaquin Phoenix's involvement in the film speaks volumes to the sentiment, at least in this cinematographic circle.
Taking away from Gaza, another big political movie is, of course, The Wizard of Kremlin. What a reaction has that movie been getting? And does it feel especially timely given what's going on globally right now?
Well, yes, for sure, The Wizard of Kremlin, as well, is drawing intense attention and sparking a lot of dialogue in Venice. Obviously, it's an exploration of Putin's rise or the early years and how he became this larger-than-life figure, political figure, very, very early on. And director Olivier Assayas cast Paul Dano and Jude Law in the role of Putin as the leading actors. And overall, the reviewers and the sentiment is that it's a very nuanced approach to looking at Russian politics in that very particular period in time. It was a time in history when the Cold War ended, when the Berlin Wall came down. It's an adaptation as well from a Giuliano De Empoli bestseller. And of course, it is very timely given everything that's going on. But the key point, I think, that both the cast and the director tried to convey, took pains to point out, is that they weren't looking to be controversial, that this figure is a character within a much broader story, and it's actually a reflection on politics today, and that it's very important to get all the different points of view, as otherwise the risk is oversimplification.
Alina, as we have you, let's talk Hollywood for just a minute. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is in The Smashing Machine. It's already been tipped as Oscar-worthy. How much of a buzz is building around his performance in that movie?
Well, major Oscar buzz. They held a deeply emotional premiere that ended with a 15-minute standing ovation. Now, the clapping, the ovation at the end of the official screenings has become a bit of a thing in film festivals. It's considered, a sort of barometer of audience satisfaction and approval. And again, it's the longest so far in this year's festival, and critics and audiences are very much praising his raw, vulnerable portrayal of champion Mark Kerr, drawing parallels with recent Oscar wins at Venice, and also fueling a lot of speculation that, Johnson could be headed for similar awards glory. And it's got to be said, Venice has become, over the years, very much considered a sort of tipping festival for, future Oscar winners. So we'll see.
Alina Tribatoni, thank you so much for joining us. Now to Washington, where Epstein victims and lawmakers have held a press conference demanding the full release of all files in the case. This comes after a House panel published more than 33,000 pages of Epstein documents earlier today, including flight logs, court findings, and jail footage. But lawmakers say that while the files add some detail, key information like the full client list remains missing. For more on this story, we're joined from Washington by our correspondent, Kate Fisher. Kate, tell us the main points that we've seen come out of this press conference, which is happening today.
Well, it was filled with survivors of the abuse of Jeffrey Epstein, as well as members of Congress. One of the most prominent, Marjorie Taylor Greene, usually a strong, staunch ally of President Donald Trump, but she came out today to say that this is the most important fight we can wage here in Congress, fighting for innocent people that never received justice. And she is just one of 3 Republican women who've signed on to this measure brought by a Republican jointly with a Democratic colleague. They are petitioning for the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that the shame falls on the people in power that protected the monster, as she describes him, Jeffrey Epstein, and his cabal that continued a nightmare. The truth must come out, and the government holds the truth. Now, President Trump, as I say, usually an ally of Marjorie Taylor Greene, says the exact opposite in comments he made in the Oval Office just a couple of minutes after that. When he was asked about it, he dismissed the call for the release of these files, calling it a democratic hoax that never ends, saying no one's ever satisfied, saying that these demands were irrelevant to the successes of his presidency. And he sharply changed the subject back to what he deems as the successes of his presidency, saying they were more important and not the Epstein hoax. And of course, this was just minutes after survivors had categorically said that it wasn't a hoax and that the abuse was real, and had even called on the president for his help in getting these files released.
And you've briefly mentioned them there, but there are some very powerful statements that we're seeing from these victims, which are emerging from today.
Absolutely. As many as 100 women who were abused by Epstein were on Capitol Hill this morning. One of them, just as an example, Jenna Lisa Jones, an emotional testimony from her relaying her encounters with him. And she said, "I remembered crying the entire way home, thinking about how I couldn't ever tell anyone about what actually happened. This guy was so rich, had so many pictures with so many famous people, and no one would ever have believed me if I told them." Another, Courtney Wild, was asking questions of reporters and the public and supporters there, saying, why did nobody but our lawyers care before now? Why was Jeffrey Epstein so protected? And she said that this issue actually has nothing to do with politics. It's an everyone thing, not a red or a blue thing. Another very powerful testimony saying that the survivors were not asking for pity. They were demanding accountability and justice, asking to protect, are you going to protect, asking members of Congress, are you going to protect predators or protect survivors? And then this victim said she threatened to create a list, that the survivors threatened to create a list of the perpetrators of their own, saying that we know the names and we will create our own list. It will be a list by survivors for survivors. And another interesting note to say that one of the survivors said that Jeffrey Epstein would brag about his friendship with Donald Trump.
Kate, switching to domestic security right now, and it's been a busy day in Washington. Donald Trump has announced that he's sending the National Guard into Chicago. What is the story behind that move, and how has it been received locally and also nationally?
Well, this is all part of President Trump's bid to try and crack down on crime in areas he says are crime hotspots, usually Democratic-led cities like Chicago and here in Washington, D.C., where we now have the National Guard on the streets here. Now, it's a lot easier for him to do that in Washington, D.C., because it is not a state and the federal government has a lot more jurisdiction here than it does in other states. And he has, as you say, threatened several times now that he will do the same thing as he's doing here in Washington, in Chicago, which he says is a place where crime is out of control. However, he doesn't actually have the legality necessarily to do that. So he is calling on the state's governor, Illinois Governor Pritzker, to invite him to put the National Guard in Chicago. That's something that the governor is refusing so far. Just again, a few minutes ago in the Oval Office, Donald Trump saying we could straighten out Chicago if only we were asked. But But the governor has not asked, but says he believes that already plans are being made to deploy the National Guard in the city of Chicago. And this is all kind of a big show by Donald Trump to not only show his kind of power, but also to suggest that Democratic leaders cannot keep crime under control in their cities. And I should note that Washington, D.C., one of the places he's doing that, crime has actually been falling in recent years.
Kate Fisher, our correspondent in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. And a reminder of our top stories. Xi Jinping showcases China's military might in a grand parade attended by Putin and Kim Jong-un, as Trump accuses the three leaders of conspiring against the United States. And on the sidelines of today's events in Beijing, Putin invites Kim Jong-un to Russia after they hold a 2.5-hour meeting together. Plus, thousands of Israeli reservists join a major military offensive in Gaza City as protests erupt outside Benjamin Netanyahu's home over the fate of its hostages. That's all from us on W News for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and as always, you can follow us on X. The Real Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next, and we'll be back in just a couple of hours with W News Extra. But for now, goodbye.